Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and today I thought I would just kind of do like a weird little ramble thing. We'll kind of see how it goes about two modernist women who are generally described as unreadable modernists that I think are worth reading. One of them I have read more work by, but I just wanted to like put them together, and yeah. I haven't really made any plans for this video except from like the title came to me and the people who should be included on it came to me. I did think about some other people that I might include on this, but I decided to just keep it with these two. Maybe I'll make this a series if I come across any more that I think are extremely difficult but definitely worth reading. I think let's start with the most difficult, which is Juna Barnes. You know, who's basically like the self-hating gay goth GF of modernism. She has like a whole range of things. She also wrote plays. I haven't read any of her plays yet. She was writing what from like the 20s. She was also a journalist actually, I think in the like teens, and moved around Europe and lived in Paris for a long time and had like a long-term relationship with Thelma Wood, who's like a sculptor, that's the word for it. I think she was a sculptor, wasn't she? And it was pretty turbulent. She definitely also was like addicted to alcohol, and she went back to America, and then also she kind of like recanted a lot of her queerness in her later life and was sort of quite homophobic, although obviously it's very complicated, but I mean she was obviously deeply in love with a woman, so I don't think there's any way you can say that she wasn't queer, but obviously yeah, I would say that the tone in her work ranges. I definitely do have some very not enjoyed books of hers that I have read, and then there's some books that I have really not enjoyed but in a different way than to say I don't want to read them and I don't think other people should. You know what I mean? So should we start with the hardest or should we start with the easiest? I feel like with Juna Barnes, your kind of first interaction with her will be like characterized by what you're kind of looking for, like the approach you're taking to modernism. So if you're kind of looking for like the big boys of modernism, then you will have like heard of or read Nightwood, which I believe like T.S. Eliot edited, and that came out in like 36 I think, and that might be your first, and I mean it's also her most famous work, so obviously generally people might have heard of that one, although it's pretty unlikely they've heard of her. Or if you're a dyke or a lesbian, or you're just interested in like sapphic modernism, then you might have encountered The Lady's Almanac, which is her, like, I would say her gayest work. I haven't read all of her work, full disclosure, but I have read a couple pieces of her work from various times. I don't think I have read any of her plays, like I said, but yeah, I've definitely read another novel called Rider, which I didn't like, and it deals a lot with like family dysfunctionality, and I would say also like sexual violence and like incesty type stuff if I remember correctly, so I didn't enjoy that at all. She also wrote some poetry, some of which I've read, a poetry collection called The Book of Repulsive Women, which has various different poems. The collection that I read of it isn't just that specific kind of pamphlet, like it had some other poems from later on, and that's quite early work if I remember correctly, like I think it's definitely like 1910s. I've also read some of her short stories. There was like a cute little Faber bind up of like the Lydia Steptoe stories, I think is what it was called. So I've read that. So yeah, like I said, I haven't read all of her work, but I have read a range. Yeah, I think she is like notoriously difficult. So even in her fun book, The Lady's Almanac, it is also quite sort of nonsensical, and it is quite like complicated, and at points I would say quite like opaque. It's also sort of, it is quite like an in-joke in a way, but like obviously that means we can still enjoy it, even if we aren't the people being parodied in it. So The Lady's Almanac is a book that is about basically like this collection of sapphic women in Paris, including people like Radcliffe Hall and Una Troubridge and Natalie Clifford Barney and yeah, other people like that. And it's written in this like mock, like, you know, early modern like Elizabethan kind of almanac idea, so it goes through the months of the year, and yeah, it's just very like gay and full of kind of wordplay and yeah, like I said, satire and parody, and it ends with like is she called Evangeline Musset, who's the Natalie Clifford Barney character, having this like tongue. She's like venerated as a saint, and there's like a tongue set up to be to her basically. I haven't actually read this in a while, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right, that they make like the tongue thing. It's at least a monument. Anyway, in fact look, it's a picture of Juna and Natalie Clifford Barney on the back, so that's very nice. It's actually a very sweet picture. So yeah, fun. This copy is actually really cute. Amanda gave it to me, which was very sweet, and it has some of these like highlights which are all to do with like nature, I think, or I think that's what we decided, and like, or like elements. And then it also has in the corner Patience Allen, October 1993, Chicago. So that's cute. I also like that this press is called Dalkey Archive, which is very close to Dalkey Archive, like, which, wow, sounds hot. So Juna Barnes's other work that I wanted to talk about specifically that is pretty unreadable, but worth reading, I mean, question mark, is Nightward. I actually do have two copies because I read this copy and then I found this copy with this like incredible, gorgeous, like 30s glamorous cover, which I just loved. But then this has like my underlining and stuff, so I kept both. So Nightward is, I think it is often described as a novel. I definitely think you could sort of argue it's more like a novel in short stories, because each chapter does tend to take one character, or at least, yeah, there are these characters and they do wind together, but it isn't quite sort of cohesive in a way. And I do, you know, I think that's all purposeful. It is a pretty unbearable reading experience, both in terms of like the emotion and the just like howling, haunted tragedy that it is kind of like discussing and exploring. And I guess that is just like love and humanity and death. But it is also in the intensity with which it captures this deep level of like, honestly, almost like a disgust is really incredible. And yeah, it is haunting in the sense that it really stays with you and almost like bothers you. I think it does. It really gets under your skin. It shows this like deep need and this like deep, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that I like the sort of political outlook on humanity that this book is about, because it is like almost, it's not like it's really cynical, because I don't think it's sort of like talking about it in that respect, but it is very like, it is very ugly about, yeah, human need and human relationships and behaviour. It is very interesting in a kind of like lesbian and gender kind of way too. You know, one of the characters is called Robin Vote. I can't quite remember when it's set, but I believe it's in the early, oh, it says it's in the Roaring 20s. So, you know, around the time that women are being like sort of politically enfranchised in terms of the vote. Obviously not all women and not in all the same places. I actually don't know about like French women getting the vote time frame, but anyway, it is also obviously kind of different to be like an expat from like America in Paris, or even from other places in Europe, because Paris is this like symbol of kind of like freedom and liberation in a very specific like gender way. And you know, that's something that is very much present in a lot of like sapphic modernism and in a lot of like, you know, I mean, the Lady's Almanac is kind of like a key example of the way that Paris itself predicated and kind of perpetuated like a community of sort of sapphic women who were like sort of, you know, more like an open secret, but like a very open secret, just able to kind of live together. And you know, it's all like attenuated by their like wealth and their race generally, although there were some, you know, there were lots of like performers of colour and like women of colour who, yeah, were part of like Parisian theatrical life, and you know, a lot of them were queer, like Josephine Baker is one of them. And I definitely think there were a lot of like crossovers there, but I haven't found that much information about that. I do know that it happens because some books like reference it, but then they never really talk about it in depth. But obviously that's very interesting. Anyway, back to Nightward. Yeah, so I would also say that this is like the kind of book where, you know, like it's Angela Carter-esque, or maybe Angela Carter is like Juna Barnes-esque. I have no idea if she would have like read or enjoyed this, but I do, for a while there I was like, maybe I should write something about the connections between Nightward and Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, because they're both kind of about like the kind of depths of the human soul and the kind of exploitation and the death and the, yeah, and then they also use like the circus as one of the ways to kind of talk about that, and then to talk about the, you know, performance of gender and the sort of, yeah, a lot of stuff. So yeah, I mean, one of the good things about Nightward is it's quite a slight book, and in this edition, this edition has a T.S. Eliot introduction, which obviously I will not be reading, but this one has a really gorgeous introduction from Jeanette Winterson. So like, for example, Nightward is itself. It is its own created world, exotic and strange, and reading it is like drinking wine with a pearl dissolving in the glass. You've taken in more than you know, and it will go on doing its work. From now on, a part of you is pearl-lined. Nightwood is demanding. You can slide into it because the prose has a narcotic quality, but you can't slide over it. The language is not about conveying information, it is about conveying meaning. So yeah, I do think that like if you have read Nightwood and you're kind of like, what the fuck? It might be useful to read the introduction as kind of a way to like pass your experience with it. Obviously, you can definitely still disagree and hate it and whatever, but yeah, I guess I do also think that like reading books that are difficult is, you know, not always useful. I think making things difficult for the point of being difficult, that's foolish and pretentious and just like elitist. But life is difficult, and when books are difficult, that doesn't necessarily mean that like you should give up on them. And I think that this is like a book where reading it in a way can like help you become a better reader, but also just maybe gives you some space to think about some stuff that maybe it's harder to actually think about in real life and easier to read about in fiction. I believe like Juna wrote this during or like after her breakup with Thelma, and that's one of the reasons why it's so like excruciating. Is that how you say that word? But yeah, I think I've talked enough about this. So that's Juna, and you know, I wish I could have given her a hug. She was also like an extremely stylish woman. I've seen some great pictures. The next unreadable modernist that you should definitely read is one that I have actually spoken about recently on my channel, and that's HD or Hilda Doolittle. You know, for a while, like I was like, I'm gonna call her HD because it seems like that's what she actually would want to be called. But after reading the 5-person biography about that has like a section on her by Francesca Wade, I'm not sure if that's true, so I think I will talk about her as both HD and Hilda. Because you see, I thought that HD, you know, naming herself that was actually also maybe an expression of like her gender nonconformity, I guess. But then it seems like that was quite like Ezra Pound enforced, especially at the beginning, and then she kind of was trying later on to get away from that, kind of like that sort of labeling as HD Imagist poet. And so I think I'll just try and mix it up. So I have read some of her poetry. I don't think I've read like a full collection, but you know, I like dipped in and out. And I would say she's a really interesting poet. She definitely writes quite, like she wrote, you know, a famous poem, you know, a Leda and the Swan poem. So she does look a lot at like classical texts and myths and things as inspiration often. And she was definitely part of, you know, Imagist poetry and kind of the beginning of that. And she did work with a whole bunch of men who are famous for that kind of stuff, like including Ezra Pound. I have also oh wait, do I have that here? Yeah, I do have it here. Yeah, so I lost what I was saying, but you know, like a lot of her biography, I guess, and her work has then like come down to this idea that she was like jilted by Ezra Pound, which like, whatever, he sucks. And it's just sort of like so not true. But she was, you know, yeah, part of this like poetic beginning. Something that she was doing sort of throughout her life, it seems like, is writing an autobiography, like a fictional account, and doing it in different ways and kind of starting in different places and with different perspectives, and also just fundamentally like different facts, like, yeah. So the one that I read recently was Bid Me to Live, which, yeah, is set in 1917 at the beginning, and it's a war book about like a couple and how they're dealing with both the war and also unfaithfulness. And then there is also this book, which is called Hermione, which is a book that I tried to read a couple years ago now. Oh wow, did I really get to 150? No. Yes. Well, I should have kept going. Yeah, so this is a book that I started reading a while ago, years ago, and it's just a very difficult book. I just found it really fundamentally difficult to read. And I think, you know, that is sort of on purpose, or it's part of the reading experience. It's part of maybe like trying to get to know the soul of a person and a person at all. It has this lovely picture of her on the cover. But yes, so this is, I think actually this one is set in America, especially at the beginning, and it is a bit about the sort of like love slash affair slash maybe just like the unrequited love of Hilda for Ezra Pound, who in this is called George Lowndes. So like, yeah, I guess all of her novels kind of function as like roman éclats, which also makes them honestly really fascinating to me, especially from like a gossip perspective. Yeah, and I think it's also about like her sexuality, and like there's obviously like queer undertones in this, especially in terms of like one relationship with like that Hermione has with I think a college student. She's also at the same college, like at Bryn Mawr, whatever. Mal is, how do you say that? No idea. Anyway, yeah, it resists reading, I have found, but I'm really fascinated by what I read. I am glad that I read what I did. I would, you know, one day like to finish the novel, but don't know how important that is really. Especially because what is so fascinating about her body of work, or at least her like sort of fictional output, is, or like prose, I guess, output, is that she like, yeah, was doing the same thing over and over again. And a lot of these weren't actually published in her lifetime. This one was just. She died like a year later. And then this one I don't believe was, and her daughter, Perdita, is one of the people who facilitated publishing the manuscript. There's another work of hers called Asphodel, which also had a manuscript, and I think maybe most of that manuscript was burnt in a fire, but there was a copy that left, and that has been published. And I think it's actually also like kind of a sequel to this, but it's also kind of a rewriting as well. And then there's a fourth one. There might be more, but I think these are the main ones. That is called Paint It Today, which is the one that I next really want to read, because it is apparently the most queer of her autobiographical fiction writings. I did describe this as sort of like, you know, like a book where you read a scene and it's like you just put your face in a whole bunch of water because it's all kind of happening at once. It hasn't like split kind of what people said, reality, the setting, the room, the atmosphere. It's all happening all at once, which is of course like what life is like sometimes. Obviously sometimes not, but sometimes. So in that sense it's very vivid and also quite difficult, because it is quite overwhelming, or like you're trying to understand, like, was this a thought? Was this said out loud? Is this a response? Who is saying this? And you know, sometimes it's all of it, isn't it really? Whereas with like Juno Barnes, I feel like I've read quite a lot of her work. I don't have anything specific I'd like to read, although maybe the Antiphon, I don't know how you say that, which I think is her play, is something that I would like to read next, but it's not like, you know, high up on my priorities to get to. I will just one day read it. Whereas, yeah, with Hilda, I do have like a direction I want to go, and yeah, I actually asked for that book for a gift, so we'll see if I can get a copy. I think I've rambled on for long enough. I hope this was interesting. I do just love talking about modernism on my channel, because I love modernism and I love modernist women and I love sapphic modernism. If you have read any of the books I mentioned, or any other books by the authors that I've mentioned, I would really love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, or just like let me know if you feel like less intimidated, maybe, if you are interested in reading these authors' works but you're like kind of worried about it. I really do think that like if you don't understand, like that's fine. That's kind of the beginning of a reading experience. It shouldn't be the end of one, or it doesn't have to be the end of one. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe we can talk and maybe I can help you. I also obviously do not have all the answers and definitely don't always understand. And, you know, like I said, you know, I experience the difficulty too. It's not that these books are easy for me to read, although maybe sometimes because I have more context than maybe other people reading them, they do kind of make a bit more sense from the get-go, but you know. Hi, I'm just tagging this bit on to the end of this video because I've been like editing it for the past like week or so, and like during that time I've been like reflecting on, I did mention it in like a fairly recent video, but I recently got a psychological assessment for dyslexia, which I was diagnosed with as a kid, but you know, hadn't been re-diagnosed for a while. They don't accept children's diagnoses for like adult stuff. And also I guess I worked really hard on reading, which is something that I'm specifically not naturally good at. Cognitively it's difficult for me, but I've spent so many hours on it because I love books and I love words and I love reading. And so I guess I was like reflecting on this video, and I was reflecting on the immense amount of work I've put into reading. And I guess I realised that perhaps one of the reasons why I think that these modernist women are worth reading, and also that I like modernism on a fundamental level, is that modernism articulates the difficulty I have naturally with reading, and everybody encounters that kind of difficulty altogether because we agree that it's difficult. And maybe that's profoundly validating to me, and maybe that's why, yeah, I've just really fundamentally enjoyed the challenge. And I mean, I must enjoy some kind of challenge. Otherwise I wouldn't have kept reading, and I wouldn't be doing something where like literally all it is reading. So yeah, I don't know, I just thought that might be like an interesting thing to kind of reflect on, and like to add to my discussion of Gina Barnes and HD in this case, but also to many other people who I've read and love, you know, like Virginia Woolf and things like that. But yeah, anyway, so I thought that that was interesting and maybe added some context as to why I feel like I want to like defend, or I want to like encourage people to keep reading even when they encounter difficulty, because I guess that's literally my experience. I think I will leave it there. Oh yeah, you will have seen my pink fringe. Also, I am quite sick, so I don't know, sorry about that. I hope you have a nice day when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!